Welcome on our new webcast series, Workforce Resilience, a Vision from Leaders. In the current unprecedented times, we wanted to gather and share with you vision, insights from key leaders on how COVID has impacted their organization, their workforce, and how they do see the near future. What's at stake for their people in the coming months. To kick off that series, I'm delighted to have here on call Andresberger, who is the CEO of Swiss Re Corporate Solutions. Hello, Andreas. Warm welcome.
Hello, Cédric. Thanks for having me here, and hello to everybody out there.
So you are the CEO of Swiss Re Corporate Solutions. Can you tell us a little bit more who you are and what you're doing?
Well, very briefly, I'm a citizen of the world. I was born in the southern hemisphere in Africa, in Rwanda, and I grew up in both parts of the world, so the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So the world is close to me, and now I live in Switzerland, in Zurich, and I work in Zurich. Before that, I traveled the world almost in all continents, in Latin America, and I worked in South Africa. I worked in Europe, obviously, in various places, US, obviously, and Asia-Pac are also regions close to my heart, but I haven't operated out of those territories, but I have done a lot of work there. So COVID is a global phenomenon, so I could have the opportunity to look at it a little from various angles from a regional perspective.
In terms of Swiss Re Corporate Solutions, can you tell us in a few sentences what you are providing as solutions?
So Swiss Re the purpose of Swiss Re is really to make the world more resilient. So with that theme in mind, you can look at it from a reinsurance angle, which is the very strong traditional base of Swiss Re, which then expanded into the direct insurance space with corporate solutions, and then in the B2B2C space with what we call iptiQ. Those are platform-driven businesses in the B2B2C space. So to make the world more resilient, that's the theme. And then in my specific area, we address the corporate segment. We have access to the direct risk pool of corporates versus the cedents on the reinsurance side. That's the traditional customer base.
So the purpose of Swiss Re is to make the world more resilient. If we discuss now the resilience of your workforce and how COVID has impacted your people over the past months, what are your key learnings from that time?
First of all, I must say we were very blessed, because from an operational perspective, so everything that's around infrastructure, IT infrastructure, devices, and connectivity, this worked in lockdown periods. We were quite surprised ourselves, so we didn't really have any major difficulties. So connectivity and working amongst colleagues worked very well, but most importantly also towards our customer base, our corporate customers, but also brokers. This was a very important phenomenon in the COVID days, in particular in the beginning, as we were all learning from it. And obviously, as then the COVID crisis continued, we have experienced various levels of personal and emotional volatilities, etc. So I think we learned with COVID, we learned really about ourselves. And we learned also how to address all those issues that came up. And on the positive side, we also learned that things can be done in crises when you don't have a choice, really. So you don't have a big debate around options, etc. So you just had to be very flexible and very close to your people in order to win their hearts and their trust, because everybody was on their own, basically. If you look at some stats, when we look at work from home, and I looked just at a few numbers from 2019 to actually 2021, January 2021, we saw Zurich as the home base had a very high occupancy in 2019, 61%, went down to 21, basically 30%, and then 8% in 2021.
So basically what you're saying is 97% of the workforce is working from home, actually. And even in the Zurich HQ, 92% is working from home, if I understand well. So quite a journey, huh?
Which is a moment in time, obviously now in January 2021, and we'll have to see how this develops.
Yep.
But if you take 2020 as a full COVID year, I think that's an interesting data point to take. But most importantly, the latest employee engagement survey really showed some very, very encouraging facts. And I'll look again here. We have got 92% of all employees. They are positive about the care and concern demonstrated by senior leaders, which I think is a very high number. And we also see that 91% of our colleagues, they understand how our strategy, the corporate solutions, Swiss Re Corporate Solutions strategy and value proposition will help transform the business. So that connectivity, to the business and to the strategy is still there, is intact. And that's the data point we need to really keep in mind, when we look into the future and try to create that bond, between the employees and the company strategy and the purpose of the company, because they have to translate that into a value proposition towards their customers and brokers.
Andreas, so 92% of your workforce is positive about the care that management is demonstrating, and they are obviously strongly connected to your business strategy. How did you manage to do so while basically 90% were working from home?
It's interesting. I'd like to start pre-COVID actually, because when I joined in 1st of March 2019, my business division found itself in a very difficult profitability situation. And we decided to really have a very drastic review of our strategy, because we believed we had to fix the issues once and for all. And this needed a comprehensive approach. In order to do so, we had to win the people's hearts, because we had to address deficiencies from the past, and it was us. We were part of that story. In order to do so, we had a very clear plan, very detailed plan laid out, and we did a very thorough assessment of the leadership, and we renewed that assessment. And then we handed over for each leader, we handed over what we call the playbook for change. And the last page was the commitment page. So each leader had to sign a personal commitment to deliver on that change and to be part of that change. So we created that ownership. So they couldn't just look at me as the CEO, as a leader. They were part of that story. And the implementation was monitored very closely, quarter by quarter. And then people could see the positive impact of their actions. In order to do so, they also had to reach out to the staff. So we had to cascade it through the organization. And this was done by communicating the reason why, etc. And also by creating that passion, that interest also in people's destinies, because we had to prune portfolios, discontinue portfolios, turn around portfolios, and this also had some people implications. The point is that people wanted to know that we care about them. And each and every leader had to have that compassion, that element of compassion and care about the people. So this was the beginning. And then came COVID. We then realized that we could build on that trust that we created. And trust is the critical word here. We were reaching out virtually. We were giving space for their physical needs, their problems that they had in their home. And the next one was obviously the mental health side, where we saw really that people were stressed, that we were reaching out, we were giving counseling support to individuals. And then the last one was the relationships that we had in the business, but also to colleagues, but also to customers and brokers. So those three elements were very critical for the success, how to navigate through a very, very stressful time.
So you started to highlight some of the health challenges related to the work from home. Can you elaborate a bit more on these key health issues that you anticipated and from which you protected your workforce at that time?
Yeah, let me make the analogy to what we always call the customer journey. everybody's talking about the customer journey, to understand the customer journey, to understand the touch points and the pain points actually that the customers raise, and to address the pain points, because that is creating the superior customer experience, as we say, and this has a very close correlation to the business success and to the KPIs in our business. Now, if you translate this into our employee space, and we always say happy employees will also create happy customers. So the employee journey, and this was almost a new terminology, at least for me, to try to understand what is happening in an employee's life and what are the touch points to the company, and where do we see disruption in the employee's life, and what can we do to improve the touch points that the employee has with the company. A colleague of mine who's part of my leadership team said, look, I've got 2-hour slots that I have to continuously share with my wife. So 2 hours me, 2 hours my wife, etc. So if there are meetings, please understand I can't attend the full meeting. I have to step out because I have to take care also of our family life. We had to understand this, and we had to really build around this and help our colleague to still be part of the meetings, of the overall strategy and the implementation of the strategy.
Yes, and I understand that the link with the mental health issue that you highlighted before, so that flexibility and taking this into account was probably helping a lot. But on the mental health topics, did you put other measures in place?
Yeah, first of all, we needed to create an environment where people felt that they're safe. This is very important. So people needed to be able to speak up. They needed to get permission to work differently and with flexibility in their environment. I think this is very important. I'll give you an example on our executive committee, and we had meetings, regular meetings with COSO, the Corporate Solutions Executive Committee. After we have started to build the trust in 2019, we then realized we're not meeting physically anymore. So we needed to create a different environment to create that trust and to speak up openly, and can even speak up about everything, even vulnerabilities, own vulnerabilities. So we had what we call the private sessions at the beginning of executive committee meetings. Those private sessions facilitated, and the initial idea came from our HR head, to say we need to set the scene to create that focus, discipline, concentration, but still that environment as if we would sit in one room. While we had those meetings, we obviously built in breaks. There was an agenda, we had breaks built in, but just stay flexible. Just look at the level of concentration of individuals, and not only of a small group of individuals, of everyone, because not everyone is equally engaged, you know, because some topics are more closer to their hearts than others. And in this instance, you got to be very flexible in having spontaneous breaks, you know, having also maybe physical exercise, you know, as a team, just to say, look, let's take a break now, let's refresh and move a bit. So those elements re-energize the team. And in corporate environments, very often people would laugh about these things, you know, but I mean, in this situation, everybody was very open about this, very engaged, and it got us closer as a team, I would say.
And what was the impact of that on the overall workforce? Did you see the mental health topic being addressed better? You said creating a safe environment, so to report as well these issues.
Yeah. So the question is really, how do you reach each and every individual employee, co-worker in a global space even? And we had the same issue to address when we started to communicate our group strategy and our corporate solution strategy. So at some point we realized we need to have multiplicators, net promoters. So we identified strategy ambassadors across the globe, in functions, in regions, in all functions of the company, sales, underwriting, everything. And these individuals, those strategy ambassadors, they were responsible to bring the strategy into their community, to start to own it at local or functional level. So mixed teams suddenly were discussing the strategy rather than having only a top-down communication that is very difficult always, because you don't know really if people are really embracing it, in particular when you don't meet physically. And then after some time during COVID days, there was a little bit of fatigue. So they said, we got to take the numbers, the financials, the KPIs that we always were focusing on, and then the strategic narrative around this. We got to put this aside, because we know the numbers, we understand the numbers, but we are fatigued. We don't know exactly how to take it and then implement it and get that compassion also into my work. So they said, we got to start to articulate, to design a big picture. So design the strategy and tell the story almost like in a film script. And that unlocked creativity, even for the most expert-driven, quantitatively expert-driven individuals. And we now suddenly created a big picture around the strategy, where you zoom out and see the big picture, but then you can zoom in any individual element of the strategy along the strategy journey. And that zoom in gives you a detail about a function, a detail about a country, or the detail about the external factors, for instance, low interest rate environment or digitization, etc. So suddenly people were owning the strategy because they were telling it in their own words. And this was translated into image, into a bigger picture. That came bottom up.
Did that approach has an impact on the overall well-being of your staff?
We haven't had any data points yet. The immediate feedback that we received, and we do this after those sessions that we always have, we get an immediate feedback, was extremely positive. So people really felt like this is completely new. This is really something that's exciting, that motivates me. And they can also bring it back to the cultural and purpose aspect of our company, to make the world more resilient and to be a very collaborative environment in Swiss Re, to help each other to close the protection gap that we, as we call it.
There is one burning question or burning topic currently, is vaccination, and what is the role of an employer on this topic of COVID-19 vaccination. What are your views on that?
Everybody's looking at the vaccine as the way out of the crisis, and rightly so. I think they're starting with the most affected group of individuals in society, the elderly, the people who are working in the healthcare system, etc. I think the vaccine is, a very important tool to bring back certainty and security into society. There's a big debate around should we should vaccination be compulsory or not. So I think it's very difficult to make it mandatory in a few countries, and also from a cultural background. But we definitely, and I personally, encourage everybody to say vaccination is helping. We should be open to that. We should trust also that it has been tested. I believe that in future, if you want to travel, if you want to go into certain hospitality institutions, hotels, etc., it could be that vaccination will be required. So that there's a choice that you have to make. Do I want to participate in that mobility globally, to still travel, etc., or do I want to stay at home, secluded from everything? And that's somehow sort of the trade-off here. I believe if you really, in my personal situation, if I have to travel in future, I will definitely have to be vaccinated. That's what I believe. And we have to be transparent and open about this in our discussions.
So you see the role of the employer as facilitating or coaching in employees in making their own decision with regard to policy.
I think it's a good word. The coach, the employer is a coach, and we do care about, the destiny of our people, the health situation of our people. That's why I think we got to have an open conversation about this. At the end of the day, the decision is always with the individual. But if somebody has to travel, and I can see already, already in 2021, that there will be some requirements around vaccination before you enter a flight, aircraft, or any other traveling device.
Beyond the topic of vaccination itself, one of the consequences of COVID is that risks, health and security risks were essentially abroad. And we moved from that time where risks were abroad to risks being everywhere. Did you see a change in terms of the organization priorities in this regard?
Yes, and maybe I should mention that during COVID, we have created, we called it initially a COVID portal, but then we renamed it into the Risk Resilience Center. So what happened? We said, what's our purpose? Our purpose is really to make the world more resilient. Now, in this time of COVID, we realized that we didn't have all the information at hand in one place and a place to really exchange data and also get an agreement around data analytics to solve the most critical problems or answer the most critical questions around COVID, around pandemic situations. So it started with COVID, and we now more and more expanded to other risk areas in that world. So what happened was that external data providers or academia, leading universities, MIT, Stanford, for instance, data providers, public institutions came onto our platform and provided data. And with these data sources, we have created an analytical data model to address exactly those pandemic questions or other risk-related questions that institutions have to answer. So, as an example, we had all the data related, the deaths, the infection rates, etc., from publicly available information on our database. We had other data that people could use in the data analytics to then have alerts about certain hotspots. What does that mean to my organization? So it helped to simulate, to create scenarios for companies to support their decision-making around how do I deal with pandemic situations, as an example.
And do you see change in the organizations of your client to manage this data? Because this is something new, right?
Yes, I mean, just take an example of the supply chain. So the pandemic caused a complete lockdown at global scale. This was not predicted before. We predicted pandemics, but not the reaction of public institutions and governments to that pandemic situation. Yeah, so a global lockdown, simultaneous lockdown across the world, brought the supply chain to a standstill. So in this case here, with this comprehensive database, with the analytics around that, you could even, simulate supply chain disruptions for the future and take decisions as an international organization, maybe a company or public institutions.
As a word of conclusion, if you had to keep 1, 2, 3 key things of what has happened over the past months that you would remember in 10 years, what would it be?
Oh, I could say, what are the 10 commandments in a crisis? Number one, gather your troops. Prioritize, meaning relieve your people from unnecessary work so that they can focus because they're already feeling stressed. Number 3, integrate your company's purpose and values in your communication, and it needs to be a continuous communication. Number 4, don't only talk about data. We're a very data-driven organization. KPIs in the crisis don't reach people. Tell a story around the business, around the situation. Have a plan. To have trust in your leader is one thing. To see a compassionate leader is one thing. But people want you to have a plan because they need to have that security that you know how to guide people into a strategic direction. Number 6, leaders are really about communication. So not only you as a CEO, but also others have to communicate. It's very important. And don't allow the crisis to stop you doing anything. You need to move towards the future, towards our strategic goals, and we need to have to help our people. And lastly, remote work from home has always been there, but never really acknowledged, but it's here now. And now we have to somehow translate this into a way of working in the future. So I think those are the ones that I would summarize we should look at.
Thank you, Andreas. It has been extremely insightful, fascinating. Thanks for that conversation. Wishing you all the best to you, your family, and Swiss Re for these coming months. And a very nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cédric. Thank you.